Hello, very warm welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Sanam Shantier. Coming up on this week's programme, a new flare-up between Israel and Iran proxy group Hezbollah in Lebanon. We take a look at reactions from local residents caught up in the crossfire. The Idlib quagmire. A ceasefire is at risk in Syria's last rebel stronghold. This after the US pounded the area targeting al-Qaeda's leaders, killing more than 40 militants. Also coming up on our show this week, the unique history of Iraqi Kurdistan. We'll be delving into this troubled region with award-winning photographer Sebastian Meyer, who has recently published a photo book called Under Every Yard of Sky. But first, the tensions that have been escalating along the Lebanese border. Now, over the past week, there have been several tit-for-tat exchanges between the Israeli military and Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful regional proxy. Let's take a look at reactions from local residents caught in that crossfire. Some of them have become accustomed to these attacks, whilst others have been sheltering in bunkers.
Not your usual Sunday entertainment. As Israel and Hezbollah exchanged fire, these Lebanese villagers gathered on this mountaintop to watch the show. It was a family affair, complete with music.
We were the first ones here to see the shots.
Even after quiet had returned, the villagers continued to keep a lookout. But they're taking things in their stride.
We were scared, but around here we're used to it, so we weren't that scared.
The atmosphere was very calm. We were patient. We're used to it, so we remained determined and calm and just kept on smoking with our loved ones.
On the Israeli side, the inhabitants weren't worried either. And yet it was here in this kibbutz that a Hezbollah anti-missile tank landed.
You know, the army and something on the air, you know. We feel that there is some tension, but in the kibbutz, we live like yesterday and the year before.
In the neighbouring village, some people have had enough. Conflicts like this one impact their daily lives.
No one from the government comes here. This place is like an army base. The tanks destroyed the road during the First War, and nobody repaired it.
In 2006, a war between Israel and Hezbollah left 160 Israeli soldiers dead and killed 1,200 Lebanese civilians. With this new spike in violence, the United Nations is calling for maximum restraint.
Next to a fragile ceasefire in the rebel-held Syrian province of Idlib. Earlier this week, Russia accused the US of launching an attack during that truce. Washington, for its part, justified the strike, saying it targeted leaders of a group responsible for threatening US citizens. Now, Idlib is the last obstacle standing between the Syrian government and its military victory against a rebellion which began in 2011. As our team on the ground reports, the current deadly offensive intensified over 4 months ago.
This young man is recovering from surgery. He was injured in an airstrike and made his way to the Atma Charity Hospital near the Turkish border. Since the Syrian and Russian offensive intensified in April, hundreds have been killed and wounded. The number of patients here has almost doubled.
We had 15 to 16,000 patients a month, but now we have up to 25,000 because of the displacements. 30 to 40 hospitals and private clinics, especially in the south part of Idlib, were hit by airstrikes. Most of them are out of service.
Many victims are from places like Sarakeb, east of Idlib, near the front line. It's now a ghost town. The day before we arrived, this house was hit by an airstrike. No one was killed, but Abu Ziyad's home is now a pile of rubble.
For 40 years, I worked as a teacher to make money to build this house. Now, my children and I are displaced. They didn't destroy the opposition or rebels. They destroyed a house.
Whether a ceasefire is announced or not, many residents of towns like Sarkeb no longer have anywhere to return to.
Moving on to a region that has been embroiled in decades of political and social turmoil. A people that have struggled with their identity in the face of repression. Today, we're turning our attention to Iraqi Kurdistan.
In the 12th century, a sultan in the Seljuk Empire created the first official Kurdish province. Today, up to 40 million Kurds live in the region, whose borders are still disputed. Kurdistan stretches over parts of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. In these countries, Kurds live as minorities, alongside Arabs, Turks, Armenians, and Iranians. Kurdistan maps resurfaced in 1919 after World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire. The initial goal of the 1920 Sèvres Treaty was to create an autonomous Kurdish state, but the plan was quickly dropped, and 3 years later, world leaders signed the Lausanne Treaty, which left out the Kurds. The group has faced repression in some of the countries where they live as minorities. In northern Iraq, they've governed a semi-autonomous region known as Iraqi Kurdistan since the Gulf War in the 1990s. Iraq's 2005 constitution recognizes that autonomy, and today the region is one of the most stable in the country. It's governed by Nechirvan Barzani. The Kurds fought alongside Iraqi government forces to recapture the territory taken by the Islamic State armed group. After that successful campaign, Iraqi Kurdistan held an independence referendum in September 2017. Nearly 93% of voters were in favor. Relations then soured with the central government in Baghdad. The main sticking points: disputed territories and the status of Kirkuk province, home to one of the biggest oil fields in the Middle East.
We're now joined by Sebastian Meyer, a veteran photojournalist who's been covering Iraqi Kurdistan since 2008. At the heart of his coverage, the untold stories of the region. Sebastian's also just published this book. It's called Under Every Yard of Sky, a medley of photographs and essays. Sebastian, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, before we actually delve into this book, I'd really like to talk about the first photo agency that you helped set up. The aim was to provide a platform for regional talents.
Yeah, when I first went to Iraqi Kurdistan, I was surprised. I was there on assignment, and I met a number of Iraqi Kurdish photographers, and I was absolutely blown away by their talent and by all the images that they'd taken that I hadn't seen of Iraq. And I realized we were missing, as an international audience, an entire view of both Iraqi Kurdistan and Iraq in general. This was about 5 years before the industry was talking about representation. But I knew at the time we had to give these people a voice. So with my friend Kamran, an Iraqi Kurdish photographer, we set up Metrography, the first Iraqi photo agency.
And you've actually previously said that it's very important for you to paint a picture of Iraqi Kurdistan that doesn't necessarily make it to the news. In fact, I have a quote from the book: Iraq's nuanced visual record wasn't being made by Iraqis. How do you describe that side?
The problem with the unintended consequences of war reporting is that we exoticize people by accident. Most people, after years of looking at newspapers and television reporting, would think that Iraq and Kurdistan is a country and a region entirely at war all the time. And after being there, I realized that wasn't the case. It is a region that is struggling with the issues that we struggle with in the West: rural exodus, female empowerment, political issues. And that's what I saw when I was there, and it became very important to me that I showed that we do not exoticize, that yes, these are different cultures, but we also are all human.
We'll talk about some of those issues later, but of course this book that we're talking about, Under Every Yard of Sky, it's also a very personal story. You talk about the disappearance of both your friend and business partner, Kamran, who you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we started the agency in 2009, and we became best friends. We were brothers. People would sometimes call us by the other name by accident because we spent so much time together. And then tragically in 2014, while he was covering the frontline fight against ISIS, Kamran was wounded and then kidnapped. And so from 2014 till now, we've been looking for him. The main essay in the book talks about that entire friendship, and in particular goes into a lot of detail about his kidnapping and our attempted rescue operation.
It's a really devastating story, and of course I think it certainly brings up this question that we often ask ourselves. Would his fate have been different had he been a Western journalist?
His fate, it's hard to say whether his fate would have been different, but it would have been treated very differently, both from the terrorist side and from our Western journalist side. He would have almost undoubtedly become a piece of propaganda, like we saw with Jim Foley and Stephen Sotloff. But also in that case, he would have become more of a, dare I say, household name. We would know about him. We would know about a lot of other Iraqi and Syrian journalists, but we don't pay attention to them, sadly, in the same way in the West.
Any hope for seeing Kamran again?
I think after about 3 years of his disappearance, we realized that the likelihood of finding him alive had decreased almost to zero. So unfortunately, we are now looking for his body.
Sorry to hear that, Sebastian. This is, of course, as we've been saying, a multifaceted book. In this personal story, you're also addressing really complex, politically, culturally challenged issues in a troubled region. This is also a people with a very ambiguous identity. Tell us a little bit about that.
The Kurds are a group who feel very different and are very different from the nations that in which they live. But they are dealing with the same issues, as I said before, that we are dealing with today. Technology has flooded in, and the cultural exchange is absolutely remarkable between America, Britain, Japan, and the Kurdish youth.
Sebastian, you make a reference in this essay to the song A Change Is Gonna Come, something that you've often talked about. Do you think change is likely to come in this region in our lifetime?
I do. I think, in fact, that change is already happening now. If you spend time with young Iraqi Kurds, they are as aware, if not more aware than I am, of what is popular culture internationally. They understand democracies around the world. They want it for themselves, and they're asking for it. And every day, they're incrementally moving towards it.
Here's hoping. Sebastian Meyer, photographer, thank you so much for being with us. Of course, if you want to meet with Sebastian, he'll be doing a signing of this wonderful book, Under Every Yard of Sky, at the Visage pour l'Image Festival in Perpignan on September the 6th. Thank you for watching Middle East Matters.